You're watching the Isaiah Factor Uncensored.
And welcome back to the second half hour, the Factor Uncensored. A very disturbing poll out there. 30% of Americans say they are willing to turn to political violence to put this country on the right track. We brought in our experts to talk about it tonight. Our guests are here on the Factor Uncensored. We have with us former law enforcement officer and security consultant Greg Dupree, based in Dallas, and we have Dr. Dietrich von Biedenfeld, our political consultant, here on the Factor Uncensored in Houston. So, guys, when you see 30% of Americans are now saying violence may be okay when it comes to changing the political climate of the country and righting this country. In other words, making it or taking it in the direction they want. Greg, your thoughts about this poll and what people are saying now?
Well, first of all, you got to consider who is the 30%. Is it 30% from the radical right, or are they from the left? You know, it depends.
Well, what we have seen is an 11% increase from Democrats saying, yes, now it's okay to change. Okay. I think it's like 20% Democrats and 31% Republicans. So you almost got equal footing there.
Equal footing. And see, Isaiah, when we did the segment on the Charlie Kirk assassination, I told you this was going to be the new norm. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You know, it was always an expectation for violence to be perpetrated from one side, not as much from the other. Now you're seeing it started to gain momentum on both sides because both sides are unhappy, and they're not seeing any type of change, or they're not feeling that they're being heard. You know, so now you're seeing this escalation of violence. Now, suffice it to say, political violence has always been a part of American history, but it was more localized. Now you're seeing it on a larger level, on a national level, and you're seeing it become more extreme. All you got to do is look at the guy that ran over the two girls in New Jersey that mocked the Charlie Kirk assassination, the judge in South Carolina who just had her house burned down. You know, and you can take it all the way back to the time you had the shooting at the Congress softball game when Scalise was shot and several others were shot. You know, and that was perpetrated by somebody supposedly from the left. So, you know, this is just an escalation. It's like a snowball rolling down the hill, and it's just going to continue to get worse.
No, Greg, why do you think there's a lack of satisfaction and people are not content when it comes to the right? Because President Trump is in office. Many of those on the right voted for him, and he's doing exactly what he said he would do. His focus is immigration. His focus is tariffs, many of his promises. So why would they be in a state of discontent now?
Well, he's doing what he said he was going to do, but he's doing a lot more, and he's doing some things that he never said he was going to do. And you have actually two camps, in my opinion, on the right. You had a camp that said he's not going far enough, and then you had a camp that's saying he's going too far. And so you have dissatisfaction on both sides, and it continues to escalate as he moves forward through his policies. And it's people that are getting more and more dissatisfied and unhappy, and they feel, as I said before, they feel like they're not being heard. And they feel like the only way they can correct this is to take matters in their own hands and become violent.
All right, Dr. Dietrich von Biedenfeld, your thoughts about this, the core of this topic when we talk about this poll where 30% of Americans are saying violence may be the answer, political violence may be the answer when it comes to righting this country, putting it in the right direction they want to see it go in.
Right. Consider our revolutionary roots. I mean, this country was founded on rebellion and the idea of individuals and small groups and communities being able to shift the tide to shape an entire nation in its own identity and will. Our Constitution, very different than and then the model later for European countries. So I think a lot of this revolutionary rhetoric is something that's in our blood, but concurrently, I think we've got that social media sensationalism where now a lot of those norms are being discarded because we've recaptured, regained, or reclaimed that sort of language from our revolutionary roots where we say, you know what, we're at war with these ideologies. Some of this challenge comes into certain snowball effects. So some of the behaviors, I agree with Greg, that certain things where individuals feel like the incumbent powers have not gone far enough. they're now using and legitimate that language to legitimize behaviors, those ideas. We're not on defensive. We're not protecting ourselves with our two oceanic borders. We are the Department of War. So all of those sort of linguistic things then sort of permeate into our social media rhetoric, and they can incite people and embolden people who might have otherwise felt like I should really keep these ideas to myself, or otherwise I should, could be penalized by society. Now we're sort of normalizing that sort of incendiary talk. And just as a cautionary note with polling, remember that Dewey v. Truman, who are we polling? So Greg also hit on that idea. What was our sample size? What was our sample demographic population? Are these people more politically engaged than the average citizen or resident of the United States? And so is that a disproportionate or otherwise skewed percentage that we're reporting here?
All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break here and we'll come back and finish this conversation here on The Factor Uncensored. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to The Factor Uncensored. We're talking to our guest tonight about Americans who say we may have to resort to political violence in order to right this country, get it back in the direction they want it to go. Of course, you have people on the right and you have people on the left. Now, Greg, we have recently seen, maybe a year or two ago, the movie Civil War, where we had a civil war here in this country, and it seems so foreign to people. Obviously, our history, we have the Civil War in the 1800s, 1860s, here in America. But seeing that movie 2-3 years ago, it seemed so foreign. Now it doesn't seem so foreign. How far do you think Americans will go to get their way if many of them are saying, look, political violence, 30% of this sampling, granted, we don't know who these people are, but 30% said they're willing to go down that violent path to right this country.
Right. Well, you also take in consideration that there's always going to be a fanatical fringe that's willing to take it as far as they can possibly take it, even unto death, to carry out what they believe is their mission, their goal, their manifesto, and they're willing to die for it. The doctor hit on an excellent point. He brought up the fact that social media, which plays a major role in instigating a lot of these actions that you're seeing, because when we go back to the snowball rolling down the hill. You got these keyboard warriors that do nothing but sit behind a keyboard all day on social media and other platforms, and they're hearing all these opinions that connect with the way they're feeling, and it starts building inside of them, causing them to act. Now, you talk about civil war. Everybody thinks of civil war in terms of violence. And in my opinion, we're already at war, of civil war. It's just you haven't seen the level of violence that was associated with the previous civil war. It hasn't reached that point yet. But we have this anger, we have this division, we have most of the elements that were present in the previous civil war. The purposes are different, but you still have that division. And it's going to continue to grow as long as this rhetoric continues and we don't take any type of action to try to quell all this violence that's going on. Not just, you talk about political, you got to look at what's going on in churches. We still haven't solved the school shooting problem either. America just seems like we get these problems and then we just adapt to these problems and move on through life. Well, it's catching up with us now because we can't continue to live this way because it'll eventually tear the country apart.
Unsustainable, I'm sure it is. Dr. Dietrich von Biedenfeld, your thoughts about that, and an important point that Greg made. Are we already at a silent civil war here where there's just not tanks on the streets, but some form of verbal civil war, keyboard civil war that's going on here in this country on social media?
Absolutely. And I think, Greg made a great point about these feedback loops where the environments are not just what we would think traditionally. So traditionally, you might use the family as the core unit, but we get a lot of our information, not only from social media, but our core social groups come from schools and from networks external to perhaps our specific neighborhoods. And so in that sense, you don't necessarily have parents, grandparents in a home to offer a counterpoint to what peers might be doing. We've got a lot of sophistication of foreign agents who are able to tap into algorithms and new knowledge about neural pathways and human behavior to feed people the language that they need to hear to really weaponize them. And so at this point, we're still in the Cold War stages of this Civil War because it's verbal. It's
Exactly.
these memes and pictographs and AI simulations mocking each other, right? But at a certain point, this can escalate to violence, particularly when we get these individuals in proximity. So when we see things like riots, or if we see two sets of people who are brought together in a combustible mixture, such as military and protesters. And so
Mhm.
that's one of the challenges we're looking at, where we're on the cusp of possibly seeing a physical interaction where individuals are not separated by the bounds of physical space. They're only connected by these electrons in their social media chat rooms, where they're able to throw barbs and toss proverbial grenades at each other with teasing or memes or other sorts of offensive gestures. But they're actually going to say, wait a second, I can cross state lines. I've got a vehicle, I've got a plane ticket, and I need to go solve this problem in a much more physically violent way. We've also seen, very much like the movie, the governor of the largest economy in the United States, an economy larger than many countries, now trading barbs with the president. And you say, well, what if California, Oregon, and Washington State decided to break away and join Canada or rejoin Mexico for that matter? What would we do?
That's a question, and that's what we saw in that movie. So
Isaiah,
my bunker is stocked, guys, in case there is a war, and I have a new cell phone that lasts 6 months. So
you need a
I'm gonna be
satellite
fine.
phone, Isaiah.
Right.
Thank you guys for joining us, and of course, we wish this country the best because we're in a tough position. Thank you for both joining us here on the Factor Uncensored.